Kasumi no Kata. The first practice we will look at in the Onoha Itoryu Sokakuden is Kasumi no Kata, which is not part of the traditional curriculum. It's a travel kata my sensei developed to practice while he was traveling on ships when he was a young man. It contains a lot of technical and oral and other information folded into it. It's short. It looks like this. And it's a good place to start, I think. It's also the place where I personally started. It was the first thing I learned when I entered into the dojo in 1995. It has one replaceable part, the draw. It begins with the draw, and there are 12 different draws that you do sequentially. And then it's followed by a 4-action sequence, which is the core of the kata. And then a chiburi, which is a kind of ritual gesture to throw blood off the blade, but like a finalizing gesture. And then a resheathing. That can be done in about 4 or 5 seconds if you're doing it fast, or 10 to 20 seconds if you're doing it slow, or a couple of minutes if you're doing it very, very slow. There's all kinds of body mechanic movements and so on folded into it, each of which takes some time and feeling to get into. More than like hard physical training, this is a practice of feeling your way into certain things, certain ways of moving, which is why we're going to begin with it. Let's look at the overall thing first, here, and then some of the details. However, I am going to do 12 separate short videos, one for each of the draws. And in each of those, I will also add in more detail. We're going to look at, for example, wringing of the arms. There's a kind of introductory version of Kiriotoshi without an opponent, which is can be a useful starting point for that very difficult technique. There's information about hitoemi and single lines in the body, which we will look at in one of those weeks. And there is a lot of different detail that we'll go over. To begin with, in this first video, it's just, an introduction to the shape, which is consistent across the entire 12 weeks. And a beginning. Feel your way into this kata. It's short, it's fun, it's simple. Yes. So first of the draw. The first draw is I think of it as a horizontal draw. It's actually rising up from the level of the hips to the level of the shoulder. And it moves in a kind of horizontal line. When I'm doing these, you'll see I'm mostly using a wooden sword. I'm doing that because that's the most likely one for everybody to have, and in fact I often practice with a wooden sword. My own practice with this kata initially was only using a steel sword because it is about drawing, and so the presence of the sheath and the angles of the sheath and all of that are quite important. However, over time I came to emphasize more the body mechanics, and for that you don't really need the wooden sword. Also, in my own dojo, I don't want to make my students have to carry 2 or 3 swords if they're carrying swords throughout their workday and then coming to the dojo afterwards before going home. It seems a little excessive. And so I do everything with the wooden sword. And if that's what you've got, then by all means use it. If you do have a steel sword, then the way I draw the wooden sword incorporates all of the necessary mechanics for drawing with a real sword. This includes things like folding your thumb out of the way so you don't cut up when you draw the sword. And this opening backwards of the back of the chest, which draws the saya backwards, the sheath backwards off the blade. That movement, and you'll see it now here. This movement is very, very interesting and kind of important, to be opening the chest in both directions. We automatically open it to the front to draw the sword, but we often forget the back and leave the back half of the body kind of inert or dead. The opening both ways kind of stretches or takes the looseness, the floppiness, the useless looseness, shall we say, out of the body, so that it's kind of communicating well, right to left and top to bottom. And for that, you need a light torsioning, like a tuning. To be completely relaxed is to fall to the floor and be unable to move. We need a tuned relaxation. And so for that, we open both sides of the chest when we draw. The footwork also on this draw is something which we will come back to a lot. This is stepping into hitoemi, we say, into a one-line body. And the one-line body is important, and the moving into and out of it is very, very important. After having made the draw, in the version I am teaching here, the initial version, we are retreating back to the kamae Kasumi, this kamae. In the original version, Sensei went to a different kamae, Shinken. We will look at that a bit later. I'm starting with everything in Kasumi no kamae for a variety of reasons, including that the timing and movement between the hips and the shoulders and the sides is much more easy to understand if you do it from waki. Shinken has exactly the same mechanics, but it's much more difficult to see and practice when you do it that way. However, there is some fascinating aspects to the Shinken version of this, which is why we will do it a bit later. The cut, this cut is a beginning version of Kiri Otoshi. You are in hitoemi, a somewhat sharp body shape, which is not so stable front to back. It's stable out the legs, but not out in front of the body. And so cutting in this position is deliberately cutting in a difficult position. So you are teaching your body to counterbalance the cutting force with a dropping weight inside your own body, so that you can in fact cut in difficult or compromised or unusual positions. This is also part of what the Shinken is about. Um, the kiri otoshi, which means a cutting drop, is not quite the same as a kiri, which is a cut. With a kiri, there is an aggressive intent and usually an entry into a movement towards what you are cutting. The stepping towards is part of the cut. So you cut out, and then your blade comes back to you as you regain your balance. Kiri otoshi is the opposite. You cut down, you drop. So from here, this and then ride your own momentum forward. These two form like halves of a circle, in fact, like out, down, and back, or down, out, and then back. Yeah. And so this Kiriotoshi shape, this dropping and then coming back, is a very interesting beginning to what is a very long and fascinating study, the study of Kiriotoshi, which is the core technique of the Onoha Itori, of all Itorus, I think, actually, but certainly the Onoha Itori and certainly the Sokakuden. The like law that came with the technique Kiriotoshi is that if you understand Kiriotoshi, you understand the entire school. That's all. A high level of understanding of Kiriotoshi should result in a master's license being given to you, even if you don't know any other techniques. That's how central it was considered to an understanding of the Itoryu. And considering how malleable it is as a technique, especially a defensive technique, I can see why they would say that. Anyway, this is the beginning steps of that. This part, which I think of as the forestalling, is to put the monouchi, the cutting part, into your opponent's face while stepping away from them. This is a practice of keeping the body in hitoemi, in a one-line kind of posture, while moving neatly. And it's essentially a footwork practice rather than a cutting practice. The cut to the rear is an example of a kind of three-dimensional, what my sensei called three lines practice, where you are doing three things simultaneously. Not kind of simultaneously. Three things are overlapping, shall we say. They don't always start at the same time. Three parts of the body. Suburi, lifting, cutting with the blade is a three joint activity: the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder complex, or a fork if you add the hips. And so doing multiple joint activities rather than rotating around a single point, you're rotating around multiple points at once, or moving in multiple directions at once, is a core practice that we will spend a lot of time on. And so this cut, which is simultaneously an evasion, you are stepping off the line in a 45-degree angle forward, while your sword is actually doing something quite different. It's moving in the opposite direction, backwards. The chiburi here is, as I said, a ceremonial gesture, but it's an interesting ceremonial gesture, and certainly moving into it, this rotation of the blade, is a movement inside the chest. It's a chest exercise almost, and then the cutting as well. The thing to watch here is whether there is a access point in the shoulder or not, because there shouldn't be. It should be simultaneously a movement of the wrist, elbow, and shoulder, chest area, with the result that if you let go of the sword, it will go in a straight line. It wouldn't spiral out or spin out. Um, and the resheathing is just the version that my sensei taught me and preferred. There are many ways to resheath the sword, of course. This version starts with the blade in front of you, with the point continuing to point forward at your opponent, pretty much throughout the course of the resheathing until it comes back. Sensei referred to the shape the sword and the sheath make in front of you as imitating Mount Fuji, which is why he liked it, I think. So it's a short kata, right? It's a elegant kata. It's a kata that I have done with all kinds of different materials, like a real sword's small pieces of wood that are just enough for me to show where my hand should be, random sticks, all kinds of things. Nothing sometimes. I've done it in all kinds of places, in public places, on beaches, in that space beside the toilet in a airplane as it's flying over the ocean. It can be done in a very small style and in a very large style, fast or slow. All of its details are interesting and important. All of its details teach something interesting. Which brings me to my final point, which is a relationship to kata, which I think this kata especially emphasizes because it's a solo kata. So the thing with kata, kata as a practice, right, is somewhat tricky because it's easy to do it wrong. It's easy to think you are learning, extracting combat skills or something that you like pull out a bit and then practice it and then use it in some way. Kata is often teaching complicated things like the interaction between things or timing or breathing or so on. Many things which have nothing at all to do with combat per se. And so they are, you could see kata as a kind of complex of movement which is crammed, thick, black with information. And the question to ask is always, what is it trying to teach you? Not what can I pull out of it, in other words, because that presumes you know what's there. What is it trying to teach me? And then when you learn that, by all means, take it out and practice it separately and fold it back into the kata. And then look for what else is there, because kata usually have many, many things to teach. The obvious ones right at the beginning, and then more and more subtle ones as you go on, which is why people continue to practice them for many, many years. They're still extracting information from these simple arrangements of movement. And most of the information is not so much in the obvious things as in the tension between the obvious things, like the tension between the cut and the recovery from the cut, for example. If you cut honestly, you might unbalance yourself. And then there's a question, which is how do you recover smoothly? And that is not written into the kata, but it's definitely being taught by the kata. How to open the chest, ideas about breathing, ideas about fear, ideas about all kinds of things that are only revealed when you start to look at the spaces between movements, or how or why a hand is moving in a certain way. It's a fascinating area of study, and it's almost separate from combat. It's a way of encoding information very efficiently into a very short space, and it can be unpacked more or less eternally. And so we will be doing some unpacking over the next 12 short episodes. I apologize it's taken me so long. The technology is quite unfamiliar to me, so it's taking me a while to learn it and learn how to use it. Hopefully I will be quicker at putting these out in the future. Okay, thank you, and good luck with your practice.